Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, you've written an engrossing book on killing and the psychological costs of killing. It was Hobbes who said that the nature of man in nature is brutish, cruel, and short. The whole notion being that man has a built-in instinct to kill and be aggressive. Having conducted literally hundreds of interviews with military personnel who have killed on the battlefield, you come away with a far different conclusion about man's inherent nature vis-a-vis extinguishing another person's life.
Every species has this built-in resistance to killing their own kind. Animals with antlers and horns fight one another in a harmless fashion, slamming head to head, but against anyone else they go to the side and gut and gore. Piranha turn their teeth on anything and everything, but they fight each other with flicks of the tail. If you didn't have this, your territorial and mating battles would destroy the species. Mankind appears to have a similar resistance built into him. However, we're extremely efficient at overcoming this resistance. Now, we can track it throughout history, in which the ancient battles were nothing more than great shoving matches. Alexander the Great, according to Ardon du Pic, never lost more than about 700 men total in all of his battles, in which he killed several hundreds of thousands of the enemy. The reason is because he never lost a battle. The great shoving match was not where the killing happened. When one side or the other turned their back and fled, then the killing happened.
But as long as man was confronted directly with
Another
the
human
face and
being,
the prospect,
face-to-face, one-on-one, it was extraordinarily difficult to kill him.
but that runs so contrary, not simply of what kind of Hobbes said about man and nature, but our whole notion of kind of fight or flight, that killing is a survival instinct, the survival of the fittest.
Fight or flight is absolutely accurate and true in every situation except when you're fighting your own species. And in every species, fight or flight becomes more expansive, and you begin to try to posture and daunt. Think of two dogs or two cats fighting one another. They puff themselves up to be as big as possible. They make as loud a noise as they can. The bagpipes, the bugles, the rebel yells are all intended to try to daunt the enemy and convince yourself of your own ferocity. And ultimately what happens is one side or the other is indeed daunted and turns and flees. We have this vision of warfare being these great clash of bayonet charges and blood and gore and every man a hero slaying thousands, when the reality is that in Ardon du Pic studies in the 1800s, in all of his studies and all of his research, he was only able to find one single situation when a bayonet charge actually closed with the enemy, and that was at the Battle of Inkerman in heavy fog by accident. The reality is the average individual is profoundly uninterested in doing this.
Now, you've called your study the study of killology, yet, I mean, murder and taking one's life is as old as Cain and Abel. Why has no one ever really investigated this subject before?
We've investigated homicide.
Urban crime and the sociological antecedents.
But we've never taken a look at what happens on the battlefield. Up until 100 years ago or so, nobody's ever really looked at sex. And really, it's only in the last couple of decades with Kinsey and Masters and Johnson that we developed the body of study that we call sexology today, and we accept. It is a new study. Why, throughout this era, did nobody ever study the actual intimacy of the sexual act? Why has nobody ever studied the actual intimacy of the destructive act? The procreative and the destructive act. These are the two taboos, all fair in love and war. There are two things we would always lie about. There are two things that represent a profound human taboo. In recent years, we began to pierce the veil on sexuality, and now, for the first time in human history, I'd like to believe that we've at least begun the process of piercing the veil on what actually happens at war. Not some vague generality about the nature of battle or the nature of man, but killing, the innate fundamental process.
Well, you talk to people who have killed.
Yes.
And you were telling me earlier that you were always stunned that people who were looking at post-trauma stress of veterans would not even analyze what they went through over the process of killing. Were you surprised going in terms of the kind of things that Vietnam and veterans were telling you?
The primary surprise was early on that nobody would talk about it. Nobody would tell me about it. Nobody would answer the questions. It was clear that I had wandered into a realm that was very taboo. It was only after I had established a degree of credibility and authority as a psychology professor at West Point, and I presented information on the topic and demonstrated a degree of scholarly concern and could make it clinical, that the individuals would begin to come and talk to me. And then the surprise was the magnitude of the trauma, the magnitude of the horror, and the time after time after time when people would come to me and they'd want to talk to me after a presentation, and we'd get together in a bar like this, and they'd say, "I've never told anybody about this before." And then they'd proceed to tell me about their deepest, darkest secret. And the remarkable thing is that all of those secrets had so much in common. And when I would talk to a veterans group, and I would present to them, I'd say, "Look, there's nothing wrong with you if you react to killing differently. But the average individual reacts to killing like this." The first thing that happens is when you've actually killed somebody, there's this feeling of euphoria, exhilaration. You've hit your target. You've done your job. You've saved your life. You've saved your friend's life. It is satisfaction. Anybody who's ever killed a deer or their first bunny rabbit or whatever it is, when they hit it and it spins down, it feels good. But then when you walk up to that deer or that rabbit, especially the first time, most of us feel a sense of empathy for the creature. The Indians would ask forgiveness of the spirit of the deer. In the same way, when it's a human being, there is this feeling of profound remorse and nausea. And
this is not just psychological, this is physical also. There's a physical
It becomes
reaction,
very
right?
physical. Many people vomit. When you kill somebody at close range and you watch them spin down and it feels good, and then the remorse sets in, this backlash of remorse sets in, and you turn around and you say, "My God, I just killed a man, and it felt good. What's wrong with me?" And see, I think that's one of the keys to the whole thing. And when I tell this to veterans, I say, there's nothing wrong with you if it felt good. As a matter of fact, that's the way most people react. And you can look out in a group of veterans and you can see the ones who you've just struck home with. Their face turns red and their eyes start to well up. And it is as though you had taken their deepest, darkest secret and you'd rolled it out on the table, and they all had the same secret in common.
Well, in fact, you talk in the book about stages that someone goes through following killing someone, and that it's very similar, at least it sounds very similar, to the entire process of grieving.
Sure.
And
Kubler-Ross's death and dying stages, sure. And like Kubler-Ross, you can misapply it. There are those that say, okay, time for grieving, it's time for denial, time for bargaining, and not everybody reacts the same way. But indeed, there is usually that exhilaration, and then there is the remorse and nausea, which is a backlash to the exhilaration in many ways. And then there is a lifelong process of rationalization and acceptance. And if an individual fails in this process, then the result becomes post-traumatic stress disorder or some type of trauma that will live with them for the rest of their life. Every warrior society has a purification ritual.
Explain that to me.
Okay. All your life, you've been raised and you've been told, don't kill anybody, don't kill anybody. We hold the ultimate punishment for somebody who kills another person. And then one day they gather you all together and they say, go over there and go kill those people. In the psychological world, we call this cognitive dissonance, and so you do. You participate in it. The social pressures are upon you. It's very intense. You go, you kill. You come back, and in the back of your mind, there's the child in the mind of every human being, and it says, I've done something very bad. I'm going to be in trouble. And you must be reassured that what you did was right and good. In Western civilization, as I said, all major warrior tribes have this purification rituals. It usually involves a ritual separation, a bathing, an acceptance back into the tribe, other things like that. In our society, we have things like medals and decorations. Soldiers don't do what they do on the battlefield for medals and decorations. They do it for their friends. But those medals are like a get-out-of-jail-free card. They're a physical talisman that what you did was right, that your society says that it was good, that we honor this. Then you wear those medals when you return home. You have a cooling-off period. And then we have the parades and the monuments. And most importantly of all is the open, warm acceptance of society for the individual that says what you did was good. We honor this.
And that's part of coming through the trauma.
Absolutely.
Of killing. Knowingly or unknowingly, the military has made this part. Now, yours is more than simply a psychologist's approach to understanding current problems, but you've gone through a tremendous amount of historical analysis. And I was struck, whether it was Gettysburg or World War II, you're finding that very, very few combatants on the battlefield actually shot to kill, as low as 15 to 20%.
In World War II, we're actually firing, and we don't know how many of them were posturing. firing over the enemy's head, trying to daunt them. The incidence of sociopaths in society, people who have no empathy for their fellow human beings, appears to be around 4% among males in their 20s. It appears that the firing rate along the firing line, those that are actually trying to kill the enemy, could be brought down to this low number of 2 to 4%. 2% of all of the fighter pilots in World War II did the vast majority of all the killing in the air, and the majority of pilots never shot anybody down and never tried to.
You say the same thing happens on the battlefield.
Absolutely.
When you look at all these numbers at Gettysburg, that it was
Right.
a small number, in fact, 15% or something, that were doing all the killing, and the others were, stuffing their muskets full of shot that wasn't going to go off.
The majority of the weapons, the vast majority of the weapons recovered after the Battle of Gettysburg were loaded weapons. Well, what you get is you get this image of the individual who's standing on the firing line side by side with his friends. Bravely, valiantly, he stands, he loads, he does everything. He comes up to the moment of truth. Everybody else fires. He does not. And he brings it back down, and you go through that process again and again and again. And there were some weapons with 23 rounds stacked all the way down the barrel. As Brigadier General S.L.A. Marshall said, at the moment of truth, the individual finds himself face to face with another individual and becomes a non-combatant, a conscientious objector.
Now, you make the point that while killing may be an inherent taboo, it's something that can be learned, and that in fact the military following Korea found great problems with the fact that only 15 to 20% were shooting to kill, and started to develop techniques to increase that rate. Tell us about this period and the techniques employed.
It's a fact, this incredibly low firing rate. So we systematically assaulted that. We applied all of the tools of modern psychology in order to overcome that. By we, I mean Western civilization.
The inherent resistance to killing. We want, the military seconds, we must break this down.
Yeah. And so what we did was, for instance, in World War II, you would fire at a bullseye target. Today, it's operant conditioning. The conditioned stimulus is a man-shaped silhouette popping up in your field of view. The conditioned response, you have a split second to engage the target. The stimulus feedback, when you hit the target drops.
Right.
A reward schedule are marksmanship badges that you receive. And those marksmanship badges
becomes a conditioned response. That as soon as you see an enemy, you kill.
And it is straight out of B.F. Skinner. It is operant conditioning. We build that conditioned reflex in it. The police departments throughout America ran into a similar problem in the 60s. We found a situation where the majority, on many occasions, of police officers faced with a situation where they could and should fire their weapon would not fire their weapon. And we were losing a lot of police officers. The FBI developed a shoot-no-shoot program, which is very similar, in which a rear projection movie of a perpetrator in various circumstances would occur. Under the right cues, under the right circumstance, a police officer would draw his weapon and fire, and fire, and fire, and mimic that process, and it becomes a reflex. You've practiced it, you've rehearsed it. The thing to realize is there are two filters that the mind has to go through to kill someone. The first filter is the forebrain, the conscious rational mind. It will put you on the battlefield in a certain place with a weapon in your hand. Politics will do that, leaders will do that, other things will do that. But the second filter is the midbrain. Once you become frightened or angry, you literally stop thinking with the mind of a human being. You turn off the forebrain and you start thinking with the midbrain, the limbic system and the hypothalamus. You start thinking with the brain that's indistinguishable from a mind of an animal. You no longer become a rational creature. And what you've got to do is you have to go through this second filter if you want to make somebody kill. And the only way you make a frightened person react in a certain way is to drill it into them, to make it a conditioned response using operant and classical conditioning processes. Does that make sense? Do you understand?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you also talk about desensitizing. That's part of that. And demonizing the enemy.
Now understand, demonizing the enemy is something that we've always tried to do. And it's a flawed tool. Because what you get is you get too much violence. You get atrocities. You'll run into situations where we get our My Lais or what have you. You must be terribly careful with that. What we want in a modern liberal democracy in our army is we want to turn violence on and off like a faucet. And so what we use is operant conditioning and classical conditioning. We don't demonize the enemy, but what we do is we overcome your innate revulsion to killing. What you do is, you know, you run and as you sing little chants. You kill, kill, kill. Or you go through bayonet training. And, you know, understand, kill is like this ultimate bad word. To kill someone, this is a bad thing.
So now all of a sudden, engage the enemy.
Now all of a sudden you're standing there with a bayonet in your hand, and you bayonet the target, and the sergeant shouts, "What's the spirit of the bayonet?" And you respond, "Kill, kill." Everybody chants together. What makes the grass grow greener? Blood, blood, okay? And so we overcome this resistance and we begin to associate violence with pleasure. And the thing to realize is that we are overcoming a powerful resistance. We did raise that firing rate from 15% in World War II to 55% in Korea to 95% in Vietnam.
That's stunning.
It is. The British in the Falklands Islands found themselves in the same kind of situation where their folks were firing at as close to 100% as they could determine. And the Argentinians, poorly trained in the old styles, were firing at a 15% rate. And the British are pretty much convinced that that is one of the fundamental factors that made it possible for them to have that incredible success.
Now, your analysis puts a very different spin on a lot of related military issues. I think most particularly about, you know, post-traumatic trauma, especially the Vietnam veterans coming home. And I certainly always thought the reason they were having so much problems was because they had, you know, they weren't welcome, they weren't integrated. That back-end process of killing never kind of took place for them. But it seems that the very fact that so many more of them were out there killing than in any particular war suggests they were going to have way more problems no matter what happened.
Yeah, that's part of it. There's a twofold thing that occurred in Vietnam, neither of which, to my knowledge, has ever occurred in history. Number one, we enabled the individual to kill in a way that had never occurred before. You had made the decision at some fundamental, deep level of your mind. So we enabled the individual to participate in combat in a way which has never occurred before. We took away the option of becoming a conscientious objector on the battlefield.
Functional conscientious objector, right.
And then, at another incident, unprecedented in human history, we attacked the returning veteran in a way that's never occurred before. The purification ritual was stood on its head. Instead of being given that purification, they were attacked and condemned. Baby killer, murderer. And in the back of the mind is this little voice that says, "I've been very bad," and then you're attacked, you're condemned, you're called baby killer and murderer, and that little voice in the back of your mind says, "My God, they're right. I am a murderer.
So that grieving rationalization process could not.
Yeah. And so what happens is these individuals bury that deep inside of them, and it's just this festering wound deep inside. So many of these people, when I interview them, when you're traumatized and you never address it, the mind of a frightened 18-year-old who hasn't slept in 2 days is the mind that addresses what happened to you. You never pull it back out. You never dredge it back out. You never address it. So the mind of a 50-year-old never gets a chance to look at it, rationalize it, deal with it, give it to friends. That's one of the things that this book has been so important and has had such value in, because in the process of writing the book, copies of manuscripts, copies of the manuscript would be passed around the veterans community. And a wife would read it and she'd say to her husband, "Is this what it's like?" And then he would read it, and all of a sudden it becomes very clinical. And now they can discuss the undiscussable. And then he would force it on another veteran, and he would read it, and that veteran's wife would force it on another one, and they would read it. And it became a tool to make the unspeakable speakable, and a tool for healing.
Is that had a salutary effect within the military community? I mean, are there peers that resent the fact that you're bringing a lot of these techniques out into the open?
No, and that's a good question. You know, I wondered if maybe there wouldn't be a negative reaction, if I wouldn't find people in the military. But not at all, not in the least. There has been a tremendous positive reaction. The sales have been very high among two groups. Number one, veterans. Number two, active duty military. The United States Marine Corps has already incorporated the book into their professional development reading.
Now, one of the most intriguing yet problematic parts of the book for the uninitiated, someone who hasn't you know, really confronted and dealt with this subject before, is the proposition that killing is a taboo, that there are strong inherent sanctions against it, yet our propensity to kill, forget about the battlefield, especially within an urban civilian setting, is going up. What gives?
The first thing I want you to realize is the magnitude of the problem. Okay, when we talk about crime in America, we usually focus on the murder rate. The thing to realize is, if you were wounded in X hypothetical way in World War II, there was a 9 out of 10 chance you would have died of that wound. If you were wounded in the same hypothetical way in Vietnam, there's a 9 out of 10 chance you would have survived that wound. Now, we can accept that. The advances, the leaps of medical technology. Well, understand what that means on the battlefield of our cities. If we had the same medical technology today that we had in, say, 1939, it is a very conservative statement to say that the murder rate in Washington, D.C., or New York City, or Toronto would be 10 times higher than it is today.
Yeah, it should be going down.
Indeed.
With the intrusion of that medical
It should be going down.
advances.
The murder rate per capita has gone up about twice in America. The aggravated assault rate,
Which
the
you, in
attempted
fact, think
murder rate,
is a much better indicator.
it's a far better indicator.
Right.
And that is just escalating, skyrocketing, completely out of sight, without any indication of going down. So what you've got to ask yourself is, why? How could this happen? Well,
Especially given the sanction
Yeah.
against killing.
we know why. We, in the military, know how to take the safety catch off of a human being. We know what works, we know what does it. We raised it from 15% in World War II to 95% in Vietnam. Without a doubt, in my mind, the exact same processes are being applied indiscriminately to our cities, to our children, that the military applies to its
The
soldiers.
same process of desensitizing, learning to kill.
Without the safeguards, without the discipline and the safeguard that comes with it. Let me give you an example. Let's start at the fundamental level. Classical conditioning. You know, you can classically condition an earthworm. You associate one thing with another. A lot of us have seen Clockwork Orange. You take a sociopath, you strap him in a chair, you have him watch vivid depictions of human suffering up on the screen, and he associates that with the nausea that he's feeling from a drug which, unbeknownst to him, you've injected in him. Today we have a reverse Clockwork Orange. We have children who sit in the movie theater and they watch vivid depictions of human suffering, and what do they associate it with? Their favorite candy bar, their favorite soft drink, their arm around their girlfriend. And then we watch Pulp Fiction or Friday the 13th, Part 28, vivid depictions of human suffering, and I ask the audience every time, I say, okay, what happens in Pulp Fiction when somebody is depicted as being killed? They laugh.
When they get murdered in the backseat, everyone laughs.
We
the
laugh.
whole theater.
Oh, it's funny. We have learned to associate human tragedy, death, horror, vividly depicted, with our own pleasure. And then we go to the video arcades and we play the video arcades. You know, police forces and military forces feel that just once every 6 months is all you need to get that conditioned reflex built in. We go to the video arcade and we play these games. Operation Wolf, I can never get past about level 3, you know. The Uzi is there and it rocks in your hands and you hear the rounds and you walk the rounds into a human being and you hit him and he splats and twitches and falls and bleeds, and the reflex is built into you. Then some young sociopath that we have built walks out on the street. He has a gun in his hand because we've been taught that it's a violent society out there and the gun is the essence of manhood. The gun has been glamorized. There's so many factors involved that will put him there. Poverty is a factor. Drugs are a factor. All of these things will predispose you. Fatherless America will predispose you because you're searching after a role model and you get these violent role models being given you. But at the moment of truth, when you're a frightened, angry human being and you look at another human being over the gun sight, only one thing teaches you to kill, and that is teaching killing. And so this young individual has a gun in his hand and he kills reflexively without even thinking, and quite accurately too. And then he shows no remorse whatsoever. Indeed, he may show a little bit of pleasure. And we have the audacity to look at him and wonder why. When thousands of times he watched vivid depictions of human suffering and derived pleasure and reinforcement for it. We taught him to kill, and we taught him to like it.
But it seems a little bit more insidious than this. I mean, you've taken up the cudgel of a lot of the people who say, you know, the Roadrunner desensitizes, it impersonalizes death. I mean, the Roadrunner falls off a cliff, or the Wile E. Coyote falls off a cliff, and just ends up to a little puff and then stands up and walks around again.
And I'm not particularly concerned about that any more than I'm concerned about Mario Brothers, where they bop each other in the head with hammers. I would say it's a vivid depiction of human suffering and blood as we become desensitized to human suffering. What I would say to you is the other half, another half of the equation in which we simply enforce existing regulations. And then we have a rating system on our movies. The rating system says that nobody under the age of 17 goes to an R movie without parental consent. A simple matter of taking the existing rating system and saying, if you rent one of these movies to our children, or if you let a child into one of these movies, we will bring legal action against you. Now, once again, all we're doing is enforcing an existing code. That's not a draconian step. It's a simple matter of protecting our children, which societies can take. And we say that point-and-shoot video games are illegal. A few tiny steps, and we begin to take the pot off of the fire. And the pot will very quickly stop boiling. Some things will take generations to react to. The real death and destruction that's happening in the inner cities, the people who are growing up expecting not to live to the age of 30, those people are going to take a long time to heal. But the operant conditioning that happens in the video games, the classical conditioning that happens in the movie, decays very quickly. And this outside artificial stimulus, which is creating the violence, within just a couple of years, has potential for very quickly wearing off. And then all you have to live with is the real violence and the ramifications of the real violence, and you can begin de-escalating the spiral of violence that's occurring in our society.